one of the challenges of the modern data landscape is that you have all these disparate tools. And through, as you mentioned, it can become this swamp that you might not be able to know how to work your way through. And so one of the main pieces of functionality of Datahub is letting you search through that swamp and try to get to something, or get to a data asset that's relevant to you when you might not even know exactly what you're looking for.
Greetings, everyone. Through here. Welcome to the channel. Welcome to the show. Today, we have a very fascinating product we're going to be looking at, and the guests are also fascinating and amazing. We have the special honor of inviting and talking with Maggie Hayes. Maggie is the community product manager for Datahub, and we're going to learn a lot today and have a very fascinating conversation with Maggie. And today's also going to be a great day because we're going to see a demo of the product. So we have another guest too here who's gonna dive in really deep, show us the product, unpack a lot of things, and at the end of this, this should be a fascinating conversation. So let's welcome Maggie to the show. Hi, Maggie. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Fru. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for bringing it.
Thanks for coming. I know talking and preparing for this, you've been organizing a lot of events and also doing a lot of moving. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Just on the personal side, I just went through moving into a new condo. So going through the very fun task of unpacking everything and trying to find a new spot for it. But within kind of the Datahub side of things, we just wrapped up last week. We had our third annual Metadata Day event, which is a day for us to pull together industry leaders and thought leaders within the data space and really talk about the kind of trends or kind of the challenges that we're seeing within the data space, within the metadata. And this year we honed in on talking about data governance as code. So thinking through kind of code-driven approaches to managing data governance, either within Datahub or just best practices as well. And then separately from that, I'm preparing to speak at a conference in Israel called Haya Data, which will be at the beginning of June. And we also have our regular once a month town hall where we showcase new features, new components of Datahub, give some spotlights to some of the Datahub community members. Events galore. We have plenty of things going on over here.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for making time with the busy schedule.
Absolutely.
And I think you've mentioned Datahub a couple of times, and I'm sure for the audience, what exactly Datahub is, what is your elevator pitch, and what do you do for Datahub?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Role?
So Datahub is the leading open source metadata management platform for the modern data stack. So there is a ton of buzzwords crammed in there, but essentially Datahub is an open source platform to really manage and organize, classify, make discoverable all of your data assets within kind of cloud-based or on-prem as well a data system. So what we're seeing a lot is within kind of what quote unquote the modern data stack, there's just a ton of kind of hyper specialization of individual tools, which means that those individual tools do a really great job for very specific things. But then for folks who are managing the data platform, it can start to become really unruly and hard to keep track of how all of these components kind of work together. So the bread and butter of Datahub right now is a kind of centralized search and discovery platform. We also have a ton of functionality around data lineage. So understanding how data actually moves through different systems, anything from Mongo DB in production, or routing it through an Airflow job, landing it in your data lake, then transforming it in your warehouse, building out a DBT model, surfacing it in Looker. We can start to stitch together that end-to-end story of how that data is created, transformed, used, etc. We'll go into some of the details of it, but it's a pretty cool lens into kind of the entirety of a data stack within an organization.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating the way you put that, because I always think about this as a maturity curve. People always say we want to modernize our data platform, and then they go get like a Snowflake, and then we need some data integration, and they go out and get some data integration tools or the DBTs and the Airflows of the world. And then coming from the Hadoop world, what used to happen was the data swamp, right? Because so much data, no one knows what's going on. And it sounds like that's what you're trying to solve here. Is that a fair read?
Exactly. So it's as these cloud-based solutions become cheaper and easier to implement, you start to experience another cost associated, right? So it's more of like the cognitive overhead to keep track of how everything's working together, who owns what, how is it used. Then we start talking about like GDPR. How do you even start to tackle that? So Datahub is really meant to be this extensible framework to adapt to your organization's tech stack and just make it easier to start managing some of those kind of data governance or metadata management workflows.
That's very cool. And do you see this playing more on the technical catalog side of things or on the business catalog side? So meaning on the tables and columns, or are we talking about the business glossary with semantic types or taxonomies?
Yeah.
What space it does this play in?
I love this question. Right now, so Datahub, like I said, is an open source platform. The majority of folks who are coming into the community right now are on the more technical side. They're data platform engineers. They're interested in hooking up all of the technical components of it. So by virtue of that, the kind of genesis of it leaned more towards the technical metadata or the technical schema structure. But over the past, I might get this wrong from a timeline perspective, but over the past maybe 6 to 9 months, we're really doubling down on tying together the business use cases as well with that business glossary. So really starting to understand how does the data entity, whether that be an ML job or a feature table or a DBT data set, how does it actually tie back to the business? So you have that kind of metadata 360 view of how it can be interpreted or used across the organization.
Oh, that's very powerful.
Yeah.
And you talk about the metadata 360-degree view, which is getting data, understanding from the sources all the way to the data products that are built. And I did watch some of your talks. Great, by the way. And there was a talk about this whole idea of shift left. Do you want to talk about what that is and why the audience should care about shift left when they think about metadata?
Yeah, when we talk about shift left, we're really, thinking of it in terms of a left to right lineage graph. So data is generated somewhere, then it moves to the right, it's transformed or it's augmented, or maybe it's filtered, or maybe there's some logic put on top of it to represent some component of the business. And you have all of these different touch points of how the data may be manipulated or enriched to ultimately drive that insight or drive that measurement, that metric, KPI, whatever it may be. And what we've seen both from here, like talking with folks in the Datahub community, but also in my past life as an analytics engineer and working within large organizations, is that oftentimes we as an industry, a data industry, have put too much of an emphasis of the enrichment of metadata as a post hoc exercise. So like after you have a model in production, maybe we should start documenting it in Confluence, or maybe we should start documenting it in a Google Sheet, which I am very guilty of. And what happens is that those workflows end up being an afterthought and then very quickly start to drift from the reality of or the current state of things, right? So as your business use cases evolve, or as the even technical schema or logic, like all of the ways that data can change, there's a drift away from the actual enriching of it. So when we talk about shifting left, what we're talking about is finding ways to programmatically capture and enrich that metadata at the source. So if you're making a change to your production data environment, let's make it easy for those engineers or those software engineers to enrich that source. We'll extract that out and automate the surfacing of that within Datahub. So we can focus more on extracting it where the code change is actually happening and adapt to those individual best practices. So it doesn't always have to be an afterthought. So it's not always, is this data set, did I remember to tag it in Jira as whatever? Instead, it's just, let's automate as much as we can. And like I said, like shift left at the extraction level. So kind of concrete examples of that are, if you think about for folks who are familiar with protobuf or protobuf schemas within streaming, we can take the annotations from a protobuf schema and bubble that up into Datahub. So it can be done when the captured or asserted when the topic is created. And then as it evolves, you can evolve that enrichment within the source. Same thing for DBT. We're seeing a lot of emphasis on folks applying tags or docs macros within DBT projects. So let's actually leverage that information. Let's extract that out and make it visible to other folks.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'm very curious about
Yeah,
seeing that in
yeah,
action too as well, because I think there's a natural value you get from shifting left, because from there you can then propagate those metadata downstream.
exactly.
Because data catalog, at least in my experience doing this, tends to be something that gets difficult to maintain if it's a manual process for folks to do. So it sounds like there's some automation happening here to make that refresh and update of the metadata or the data hub catalog pretty up to date. Is that a fair read of it?
Yeah, it's definitely, that's a fantastic representation of it. The other thing that we're seeing within the open source community are folks actually building out kind of CI/CD pipelines so that when you're checking in a new schema, you can actually halt merging that if it's missing documentation, if it's missing tags. So you can actually start to like assert or kind of force some of these best practices into those development lifecycle. Because at the end of the day, documentation or kind of this tagging, it is a process problem, right? A combination of setting those best practices and then adhering to them. So we're really just trying to focus on how do we automate as much as possible and make it hard to push things into production without enriching it at the source.
Yeah, exactly. That's very interesting. And this is a question that comes a lot, right? And you gotta give an honest answer here.
Sure,
Who
yeah, yeah.
who wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, my team needs a data catalog right now? Is that the technical folks? I know you said the community is really based on the technical folks,
Yeah.
or do you see that pressure really coming from the business?
Mm. So this is a really interesting, I love this question. Mostly because I've been in the situation where I wake up in the morning and I'm like, there must be a better way. So I think,
We all have been in that
yeah,
situation.
exactly. So I think the right now within the community, like I said, a lot of the folks that are coming in are data platform owners. And what's driving them to come into the community is because more often than not, their teams are a central point of collecting and then making available data to other groups. And so, by virtue of that, when you have that kind of centralized team structure, and this isn't to say that the whole community has the structure, but it's just a pattern that we're seeing a good amount. What we're seeing is that when you have a central data team in charge of keeping track of replication SLAs and did this data land when we thought it would, and what happened when a job failed, you're also then fielding questions from a huge variety of stakeholders. And what we're seeing is that the data platform team really just wants to provide visibility of almost like a self-service, right? And remove themselves as the bottleneck into helping other people understand how to navigate that complexity. So I think that's one part, is to remove the kind of central data team as a bottleneck to discovery and actually leveraging data. The other part of it is also really building out these accountability workflows around what does it mean to own data and to be a good steward of data. So even down to just the compliance use case. How do you hold people accountable for when they deploy a new data model? What are the expectations there? And how do you just give them tools to be good owners and good maintainers of that? So I think that's what we're seeing a lot on within the Datahub community. From the business side, we actually are starting to see a handful, actually more than a handful. We're starting to see more and more like product managers, data governance team members. I'm also starting to meet some folks who are in analytics or more data science, and they really just want ways to make it easier for them to manage discovery and documentation and all of those same things. So I think where I will say that, there's no one, at least from my perspective, there's no one perfect tool for any organization. So it really does depend on, do you have the kind of engineering support required to go with open source? If not, what are your options? Do you have, if it's being driven by a business unit? So if there's part of the business side wants to introduce a new kind of governance program, then that's where we start to see folks going with more kind of like hosted solutions, either hosted Datahub or a variety of other kind of SaaS solutions that are out there.
That's awesome. Thanks for illuminating on that. And I think that's a good segue into maybe clarifying. There is Datahub, there is Acryl Datahub project. It seems like three different terms. Can you maybe break that
Yeah.
down for me? Which is which?
Yeah,
for the
definitely.
audience?
So Datahub and Datahub project are really just interchangeable. Datahub project is just the website, the domain that we have for it. Datahub is an open source project that came out of LinkedIn in 2019, and it was focused on, so Datahub was really an internal solution within LinkedIn, and they peeled off some components of it to start building out that open source community. And what Shashanka Das, who is one of the founders of Datahub within LinkedIn, what he saw is that there's actually just a huge opportunity to really treat that project as a way to gather best practices, really build out a robust offering from an open source standpoint. So in 2021, he peeled off from LinkedIn and spun up Acryl Data, our co-founder Swaroop Jagadish. And with backing by LinkedIn, they started Acryl Data to be really the drivers of the Datahub project. So you can think about Datahub as the open source project that is free to use. We encourage people to contribute to it. And then you have Acryl Data, who is actually offering a managed Datahub solution, so that maybe if you have maybe limited engineering support, or honestly, maybe you just don't want to deal with the headache. Maybe you don't want to deal with the headache of keeping up with all of those great features. Then we have Acryl Data is offering that managed solution. So you can just really focus on leveraging the tool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Maggie, for that. And this is really whet my appetite to see the product. So we're gonna welcome Gabe to. Hey, Gabe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so thanks for coming. I think Gabe will be maybe introduce yourself first, and then maybe we can dive into the demo of the product.
Sure. Yeah. It's been really fascinating hearing your conversation. I really enjoyed listening to that. Maggie, they did a great intro. And I'm Gabe, a founding engineer of Acryl Data and working on the open source Datahub project. And I'm looking forward to showing you some cool features of the tool.
That's awesome. Let's dive in when you're ready.
Sounds good. So what we're looking at here is the hosted Acryl Data version of Datahub, but everything that we're going to demo today, that's in the open source version as well. It's available to people who want to just join the open source community and install it and play around with it. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is, something that Maggie was talking about earlier, was that one of the challenges of the modern data landscape is that you have all these disparate tools, and through, as you mentioned, it can become this swamp that you might not be able to know how to work your way through. So one of the main pieces of functionality of Datahub is letting you search through that swamp and try to get to a data asset that's relevant to you when you might not even know exactly what you're looking for. So we have this example Datahub instance loaded up with metadata for a hypothetical pet adoption center. And this pet adoption center has got data pipelines and data assets and all sorts of things in it. And say I'm an analyst and I'm tasked with coming up with a dashboard describing the different breakdowns of the pets in our adoption center. And I might not know exactly where this data is or exactly what table to search for, but I just have a general sense of what I need. So we can go and type into the search bar just a rough sketch of what we're interested in. So maybe I want to say, well, I want something about pets. It's going to bring me to the search page. And on the left panel, we have all sorts of different facets that we can go and filter our search results by. So I might say, I know I want a snowflake data set, so I'm going to go filter it by that. And then in my remaining search results, I can see an overview, including things like glossary terms that you folks were talking about earlier and tags applied to the data set. And so here I can see on this pet profiles, for example, this is listed as a tier 1 data set. And that might indicate that it's going to be very trustworthy. So I can click into that and I'm brought to the schema. And now I have a sense of, I can see a breakdown of this data set. I can get some overviews of things like its statistics, how frequently it's being updated, and ownership and things like that. Without actually knowing exactly what I'm looking for, I'm able to use search and filtering to go and find a data set that is going to be helpful for me. And now I can go and do my tasks.
Wow, that's really cool. Just to double on that, you're not just searching for the data set, you're also looking for, and maybe we can go back to the screen. You're also looking at reports, the transformations that might have happened, and the entire 9 yards of getting to that end data product. Is that a fair read? Because I see Airflow in there for the scheduling, DBT, which probably has the transformations, Looker probably has the dashboards. Okay.
Exactly. So we're not just getting, it's not just that we have connected to Snowflake, but we get that whole end-to-end view from the beginning, that when that data first enters your ecosystem until all the way where it's consumed by the analysts in the form of charts and dashboards.
Oh, okay. And how does this get refreshed? Because if you think about and I'm just putting my legacy hat here,
Hmm.
the data catalog tool would be going out and doing this crawling and finding all this metadata. Is that what's happening here? You said a refresh period, or is it more of a, is it a pull or is it a push into this catalog?
So we support both types of ways of getting metadata in. So for certain ingestion sources, it's going to be really easy just to set up a pull that scans once a day. And we actually have this tab here that lets you set up managed ingestion. Essentially here, you can just create a source and say Snowflake, put in a few credentials and get it running and say, I want to have this run every day. And Datahub is going to start, taking care of that for you, going to Snowflake and refreshing things daily. But for other types of sources, we do have the ability to get this push in and update data in real time. So for example, with that Airflow source, we have code that's going to run every time one of your Airflow tasks runs, and then send us fresh metadata saying this task has just ran. These were the inputs that it had. This was the outputs. And also we're going to be able to have things like if this task was successful or not. So in this sense, you can not just get a view of what yesterday's metadata was like, but you can also see exactly as things come up, as there are issues, that information is going to be flowing into our system immediately. Something that Maggie brought up earlier also is integrating with CI/CD pipelines. And so in one sense, that means that you're able to pull really fresh metadata into your CI/CD pipelines. But it also means if you want to emit metadata when you see a schema change happen, you can emit that to us via push, and we'll get that immediately, and that'll be updated instantly.
That's very cool because you can almost use this as a step in the orchestration engine where based on events that are happening, we're not just observing, but potentially acting on that.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Just as a little preview on, we actually have a couple of our teammates speaking at the Airflow Summit today. Technically today, it's late in the evening, but we're actually introducing this idea of like circuit breaking within an orchestration job. So if there is that breaking change, or if there is something that is unexpected, we can actually halt the execution of a DAG externally. So really leveraging this robust knowledge graph that we have within Datahub, and then managing or interrupting external processes when something goes awry. Another example of that is an integration that we have with Great Expectations. So we're starting to think about data quality outcomes as well. So it's not just about like DAG execution, but it's also evaluating or taking in the outcomes from those kind of data quality tests and managing or acting on that in real time.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think at the beginning there, you did show some of the profiling that happened. Is that profiling being pulled from like deep from Great Expectations, or is that native profiling with row counts and distributions being done by Datahub?
We are able to get these statistics from the sources. We work with Great Expectations, but then also have done some of our own additions to do some performance optimizations. But what we're doing here is going to those data sets and then getting things like min, max, median, mean, and for numeric values, and then common sample values and distinct counts for non-numerics. So we are able to get these profiles, but then in addition, something else I want to show you just around the Great Expectations integration is that we also have this ability of showing separately all of the different Great Expectation checks that have run on your entity and then the results of them over time. So for example, you can see if something's gone wrong, you'll be able to get notified of that when it happens, and then also see the trend. Is this something that's just started failing, or has this been failing historically?
Okay, really cool. One other area as we were talking, I think it was hitting me on one direction there, which is the integrations. And doing this demos on Demohub, there are over 700 data products that has come across our radars to do demos on, just to give you an idea of how vibrant this community is. And so the natural question I have to ask is, you have pre-built connectors. Is there a framework for building connectors that might not be available in the community yet, or what is the approach around that to make sure that you get a broad reach to all these different data sources that are coming out?
Yeah, I'm glad to take that one. So we approach it in two ways. One is within the core Datahub team, we want to make sure that points of integration that are widely used across industries, widely used across our community, we want to make sure that those are really well vetted, hardened, well supported. And so that's where we'll start to publicly prioritize and commit to those so that folks know, so that if you're evaluating the tool, you can understand how much of your tech stack is going to be covered by our higher quality or like larger investments in integrations. But like you said, there's an ever growing number of tools that we could integrate with. And one thing, just based off of the reality that there's only so many hours in the day, we try to make it as easy as possible for folks in the community to build out, basically like extend our platform and build out custom sources for their own use cases. And whenever possible, we absolutely love when folks will contribute that back. That way, other folks in the community can contribute to it, make it more robust, make it better supported. Some kind of concrete examples of that recently. We have someone in the community who's driving the development of an iceberg connector, where it wasn't on our immediate roadmap, but someone came in and said, hey, I'm going to be building this out for my own use case anyway. Is this something that other people would benefit from? So it's really, truly a community-driven way to manage all of these different connectors. And the more that we understand what the tool sets or the most popular tools that folks in the community are leveraging, then we'll make sure that we're giving it as much love and attention as it needs. But then we're also right there next to community members that want to contribute back.
Wow, that's awesome. And how do folks find about the community? Is that something where there's a Slack channel, or like how is that being managed? So we can definitely leave a link in the description below for folks.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different ways that folks will get involved in contributing back. For one, it's just within our Slack community. We have over 3,200 people. We have 15 to 50 people joining every single day. And it's super vibrant, ton of conversation and collaboration happening there. But then separately, we have a public facing roadmap where, and you'll notice in that second column, we'll have a call for community this quarter. So in Q2, we're looking for community support around building out Flink, Clickstream, and Hootie and Vertica integrations. And that's that sweet spot of, we're hearing that folks in the community are more and more folks in the community are using these tools, but we haven't quite figured out if it's something that we need to really dedicate to on the kind of core Datahub team side. So those are areas where we can feel rest assured that if you're interested in contributing this, there are other people out there that are going to be, for one, very grateful to you, but two, will also help stress test those a little bit and drive the adoption of it.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah, we're gonna leave a link to this in the description below too, as well, for folks that wanna check it out. And the next question here, as we're really getting a good grasp of this, is it seems like, and I'm just looking at the in progress business glossary improvements, there seems to be a lot of UI improvements. Is the focus to put priority on the UI on top of the metadata, or the engineering of the stitching and the lineage and all the low level work that needs to be done from that perspective to lay that solid foundation?
Comfantastic question. This will vary quarter to quarter, but at the end of within this quarter, what you actually noticed in progress, the Java Kafka committer or Java Kafka emitter is more on the developer experience side of things, really supporting these programmatic ways of truly emitting metadata back to the Datahub platform. So it's building out that Java support. But so we try to find a sweet spot of how do we make the UI intuitive, easy to navigate, clear workflows, while also making it easy to integrate within on the back end. So this is our intake of feature requests from community members. And the way that we kind of group them, and you'll see this kind of on the right-hand side, is we have integration requests, developer experience requests, and user experience requests. And so this is where we're collecting requests from the community. Folks have the ability to go in and upvote it, subscribe to it for updates as we move through the prioritization and development workflow. But within a given quarter, what we try to do is find a nice balance between integration improvements, developer experience, and user experience. That way we're not over-indexing in any one direction.
Yeah, really cool. And what's the business model? Is it, I'm an executive, I'm very interested in this. Is it just go download the open source version, or how do you make money? Like how, what is the business model around this for teams that might be looking at that?
Yeah, definitely. So the open source project is truly open source. Datahub is free to use. Your cost is your engineering effort and your infrastructure associated with it. And then from the kind of actual monetization side of things, so Acryl Data, again, is offering a managed solution of that. So instead of an organization dedicating maybe half of their engineering team to it, and also fronting the costs of the platform. Acryl Data will manage all that, and then you're basically just paying for the hosted version of it.
Okay. And is that seat based or is it based on the connectors, or how is that, or the amount of scans that happen?
Yeah, so generally what we find is that a lot of times people start with the open source solution and then come to us for a hosted solution once they've done their. But as Maggie said, we offer this hosted solution. It also comes with some premium features on top of the open source offering. And then what we charge is based on usage. We're in currently an early access program, and we're getting close to nearing the end of it. And it's based on how much usage it has per people actually coming and using the tool.
Oh, okay. Okay. And I think that's a fair question. The folks that this gets open to, especially when you think about some of the larger enterprises that have maybe potentially tens of thousands of users, just having a little bit of that understanding to help. So thanks for sharing that, Gabe. So really good, very fascinating. I think this space of data governance and data catalog is a space that has been primed for innovation. People usually turn to this when they feel the pain, when that audit comes in and they're talking about GDPR and you need the right to forget, and the executive is calling because they don't know where the data is. So it's one of those things where it's the pain is definitely there, and I think a solution that is simple. I think you're going down the open source philosophy seems to be a very fascinating one. Any last tidbits or inputs or comments about the tool that the audience should know about, or anything we might have missed?
So yeah, one last feature we can touch on to close is, I think this kind of ties it back just to the beginning of your conversation about, how not only is it that we're going and integrating with all these different systems across your data stack, but we're also understanding the ties of how the different systems relate to one another. And we can visualize that in the lineage visualization. So for this pet profiles data set, say I may be querying this data set and I might be curious, how was this data set built? Was it built off of reliable sources? I also may own this data set and I might be curious, I want to make some change and I need to know, who is this going to impact? So I really want to see the upstream and downstream dependencies of the data set. So I can go into the lineage tab and see the different nodes that depend on it. And as I press these plus buttons, I can go and expand the lineage graph out in various directions. So taking this direction, I can go and see that this data set initially started as this MongoDB that was used as a production database for our pet adoption center. Then this Airflow task runs that dumps it into S3 on this daily basis. Then from there, it's loaded from S3 into our Snowflake data set, and that's how it gets there. And then if I expand it in the other direction, I can see how the analysts are using dbt to transform it into a different Snowflake table. Then it gets viewed by Looker. So it's brought into Looker as a view, and then it's turned into an Explorer, and then finally consumed by all these charts, which then are parts of various dashboards. So using the lineage view, I'm able to get really this end-to-end picture of how the data starts and then flows through the data, through our whole data ecosystem. So one thing that we've built in Datahub, which we think is really special, is an easier way to understand this information. So looking at this graph, one thing I can see is there's a lot going on. But as I'm sure many people are familiar with, these data in your data ecosystem, these lineage graphs can get very heavy to work with because there's just so many different assets and so many different dependencies. So one thing that we built is this tool called impact analysis. So I can go into the lineage tab and press this impact analysis button. And what it's going to do is scan the dependencies, not just that first layer or the second layer, but all the different dependencies all the way down across my graph. And I can see here's like a second degree connection, here's a first degree, here's a third degree connection. I can also go into the filter panel and then break this down and say, well, I'm just interested in what dashboards maybe were impacted by an incident that happened. Maybe my Great Expectations integration is telling me that this pet profiles data set's not passing some checks. So I want to go and see what are the charts and dashboards that are going to display incorrect information. So I can filter by Looker. And then and this part I think is really cool. Can hit download and it will get a CSV that just says, here's all the different charts. These are the emails of the owners of the charts and dashboards. I can go take that and just send out a mass email or send an alert and say, there's something going wrong. And this is actually something that we built into the tool as well. So there's this incidents tab that this is something that we're working on where you can go and just raise an incident and automatically let people know through Datahub.
Wow, that's pretty cool. That could almost be like the requirements for development teams to review that impact analysis before the development effort begins. Can you talk about the test and the policies section of this?
Yeah, so I can tell you a little bit about policies. So this is a place where you can go and manage who has access to do various actions on the Datahub tool. So you can see here that there's abilities to edit descriptions. Going to the schema, I can have the ability to apply glossary terms and tags to my various schema fields and also document them. And so there's a lot that users can do on this tool. And something that you might want to manage is actually who has access to do these various things. So in the policies tab, that's where you can go and grant these different permissions. So one thing that you can, for example, do is we allow you to organize your data sets by different domains. So anyone who's familiar with data mesh knows that it can be helpful to group your different data assets into various domains and then distribute ownership. So here I can say, I can go and delegate ownership to say, this user has the permission to update or do the documentation or do the glossary term classification of schemas in this domain. This user is the one that can manage this other domain, but then also make sure that they don't have the ability, to overwrite each other's changes.
Wow, that's really cool. And I think this kind of reminds me of, and when you're talking about this with not just the different data domains, but also the users being able to contribute to those data sets. Just recently, I bought a new wallet. And what I did was, typically I do this, is I go to Amazon. And the first thing I do is I read the feedbacks that folks are putting on that product before I make a purchase. And based on that feedback, I can either say, all right, this is a good enough product to get or not, really tapping into that tribal knowledge. And it seems like this provides that UI and that collaborative environments where folks can talk about different data sets, put comments on those data sets, and there could be an entry point to either validate what is the right data set or what data sets you should stay away from before a development project. Is that kind of, did Amazon figure this out already?
Yeah, I think you really nailed it. And when we think back to that conversation we had around metadata 360, it's not just about the technical schema. It's not just about the business use case, but it's all of the components in between that. Are there data validation tests on it? Are they passing consistently? Is this used in a business critical fashion? Is this related to a specific domain or owned by a specific team? So all of those pieces together really start to inform that level of trust or that level of relevance or application of individual entities, really bolster the kind of folks' trust in the reliability of a resource.
Yeah, that's really cool. Trust and reliability is such a powerful
It's
word.
huge.
Yeah, for the data engineering teams. So thank you both so much. I think I've learned a lot, been exposed to the product. It definitely seems very fascinating. Any last words, how users can find you in the community or in the world? Are they LinkedIn pages, YouTube channels?
Yeah, to join the Datahub community, datahubproject.io is a great place to start. We have a link out to actually a live demo site. So if you click on that demo, you can actually start to mess around with a live demo yourself and get a feel of what the tool can do. Join us in Slack. That's the greatest way to not only get a feel for what the community is, but also work literally side by side with me and Gabe and the rest of the core team. And honestly, folks from across the globe, it is phenomenal how far reaching the community is at this point. Yeah, feel free to join our Slack. I'm Maggie Hayes on LinkedIn. I imagine there's probably more than one of me, but just look for the community product manager at Datahub. And come hang out with us.
That's awesome, Maggie. Thank you so much. Very excited and so honored to have you both here talking and demoing Datahub. We're going to leave a link to this in the description below for the audience to check it out and to experience it for yourself. Again, thanks, everyone. This has been Fru with Demohub, and we're going to see you in the next demo.
Thank you.
See you, Fru.
See ya.